July 7, 1968. Wells Restaurant, Lenox Avenue. 11:47 p.m. The king of Harlem sits dying in a corner booth, but his eyes are still calculating. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson isn't clutching his chest from pain, he's protecting something. In his left hand, pressed against his ribs, is $127,000 in cash. In his right hand, sliding across the table to a hungry young driver named Frank Lucas, is a piece of paper that will ignite a war. The coroner's report says massive coronary. The newspapers print natural causes. The streets whisper heart attack. But look at the evidence they buried. Look at the toxicology report that disappeared. Look at the waiter who served the coffee and vanished into the night. Bumpy Johnson didn't die, he was executed. Frank Lucas, the man who would smuggle $1 million worth of pure heroin daily in the false bottoms of military coffins, sat frozen in that booth. Not because his mentor was dead, but because of the name written on that paper. Not an Italian Don, not a rival gang leader. The name of someone he trusted, someone who ate at Bumpy's table, someone who called him brother. For 54 years, the world believed Frank Lucas built his empire because there was a power vacuum. That's the lie Hollywood sold you. The truth? Frank built his empire as a weapon. Every brick of heroin, every corrupt cop, every $1 million deal, it was all ammunition for one target: the rat who poisoned the king. The autopsy listed time of death as 11:52 p.m. It didn't list the $50,000 missing from Bumpy's coat pocket. It didn't list the bitter almond smell witnesses reported. It didn't list the cyanotic blue tint of his fingernails, the calling card of potassium cyanide, not cardiac arrest. Frank had 30 seconds to choose. Walk away, stay a nobody, live quietly, or read that name and start a blood feud that would generate $52 million in pure profit and cost him 70 years of freedom. The silent man lives. The loud man dies. But the loyal son? The loyal son burns down empires to avenge his father. You think you know American Gangster. You think you know about Blue Magic, about the chinchilla coat, about the fall. But you don't know the catalyst. You don't know that every move Frank made, every enemy he destroyed, every throne he claimed, it all traces back to a promise made over a dying king and a piece of paper that named his killer. Who murdered Bumpy Johnson? And why did Frank Lucas guard that secret until his own death? Hit that subscribe button right now, because we're about to open the letter that Hollywood was too terrified to film. Harlem, 1967. The back room of the Red Rooster on 138th Street carries the weight of empires. Cigar smoke hangs in the air like fog, bourbon burns in crystal glasses, and power moves through whispered conversations. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson sits at a mahogany table facing 5 Genovese family capos who control every grain of heroin flowing into black neighborhoods from the Bronx to Brooklyn. Frank Lucas stands against the wall like furniture, invisible to everyone except the one man who matters. The Italians speak to Bumpy like middle management reporting quarterly losses. One capo cuts his steak without looking up. Another checks his Rolex twice during negotiations. They're reducing Bumpy's cut from 40% to 25%. Market conditions, they explain. New arrangements with Corsican suppliers. Take it or leave it. Their voices carry the casual arrogance of men who believe they own the oxygen in the room. Bumpy nods slowly, his face carved from granite. He doesn't argue, doesn't threaten, doesn't even ask questions. His hands rest flat on the table, but Frank notices something new. A slight tremor in the fingers. A weakness that wasn't there 6 months ago. Bumpy slides the paperwork across mahogany, signs where they point, and stands to leave. The capos barely acknowledge his departure. Outside in the November cold, Frank's blood boils with country rage. Back in North Carolina, men died for half that disrespect. But Bumpy walks calmly to the Cadillac, lights a cigarette with steady hands, and waits for the question burning in his student's throat. Why did you let them talk to you like that? Frank finally explodes, unable to contain the fury. Bumpy exhales smoke into frozen air, his breath visible like dragon fire. Because the man holding the gun is expendable, Frank. The man holding the information is untouchable. He turns, his eyes sharp despite the fatigue lines. They think they're negotiating with their employee. They don't know I've been recording every meeting for 3 years. They think I need them. That ignorance makes me dangerous. Frank processes this slowly. Violence is simple mathematics. Silence is quantum physics. The invisible king principle, Bumpy continues, teaching even in exhaustion. True power moves in shadows. Every flashy gangster you see in newspapers is already dead. They just don't know it yet. The loud man dies. The silent man lives. But the invisible man? The invisible man becomes legend. The education continues through winter nights. Late drives through Harlem where Bumpy explains the invisible architecture of organized crime. Which politicians take envelopes. Which cops are bought. Which buildings hide counting rooms. Frank learns that the game isn't about muscle, it's about information, leverage, and patience. But something is changing in his teacher. Bumpy's hands shake during meetings now. His breath comes short, climbing stairs. Twice Frank finds him gripping bathroom sinks, face gray with pain. The doctors call it stress, age, a weak heart catching up with decades of pressure. But Bumpy knows better. He's been in this game too long to believe in coincidences. One December night, Bumpy wakes Frank at 3 a.m. They drive to a warehouse in the Bronx where collections are counted. Bumpy goes through ledgers himself, something he hasn't done in years. His finger stops on Amsterdam Avenue numbers. $15,000 missing from the top. Not stolen by street dealers, taken by someone with access to the vault. Someone close to me is feeding information to the Italians, Bumpy says quietly, his voice carrying 50 years of betrayal and survival. They're not just stealing money, they're stealing time. My time. Frank watches his mentor's face in dim warehouse light. For the first time, Bumpy looks mortal. I'm being poisoned, Frank. Small doses. Digitalis, probably. Makes it look like heart problems. Bumpy closes the ledger with finality. The Italians want a puppet, not a partner. Someone grateful for crumbs. Someone who won't ask questions about missing shipments or altered percentages. The paranoia becomes suffocating. Bumpy changes restaurants at the last minute. He has Frank taste food before eating. He stops attending regular meetings. The tremor in his hands worsens. July 6, 1968. The night before everything changes. Bumpy calls Frank to his apartment on Lenox Avenue. The old king looks exhausted but determined. On his desk, a pen and single sheet of paper. Tomorrow night, Wells Restaurant. I give you the keys to the kingdom. Everything I know. Every contact. Every secret. His eyes burn with dying fire. Don't let them fall into the wrong hands. As Frank leaves, he glances back. Bumpy is writing something, his hand moving deliberately across paper. The old man folds it carefully, places it in his jacket pocket, and stares at it like it contains the weight of judgment. Frank doesn't know it yet, but that letter holds a name that will define the rest of his life. The name of the rat who poisoned the king. Tomorrow night, the invisible prince becomes the hunter. July 7, 1968. 11:47 p.m. Wells Restaurant on Lenox Avenue breathes with the rhythm of late-night Harlem. Clinking glasses, muted laughter, the soft shuffle of cards in back booths. The air is thick with fried chicken grease and cigarette smoke, a sanctuary where power eats alongside poverty. When the black Lincoln Continental pulls up outside, the street doesn't stop moving, but it shifts. Power has gravity, and Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson still bends the world around him. Frank Lucas steps out first, scanning corners with eyes that have learned to see death before it arrives. He opens the rear door, and Bumpy emerges slowly, leaning heavier on his cane than he did 6 months ago. The old king moves like a man carrying invisible weight, the burden of empire, the poison in his blood, the knowledge that tonight is the final accounting. Inside, their usual corner booth is occupied by strangers. The regular hostess has been replaced by someone neither man recognizes. Frank's instincts scratch at his skull, but Bumpy raises a hand. They take a table near the kitchen instead, close enough to the exit, far enough from windows. Bumpy orders without looking at the menu: fried chicken, collard greens, black-eyed peas. Comfort food from a North Carolina childhood he rarely discusses. "I know who it is," Bumpy says quietly, his voice cutting through Sam Cooke on the jukebox. "The rat. The one feeding the Italians. The one who's been poisoning me for 8 months. Frank leans forward, every muscle coiled. "Who?" Before Bumpy can answer, a waiter approaches. Young, maybe 25, wearing a uniform that hangs wrong on his thin frame. His hands shake as he pours water. He keeps glancing at his watch: 11:49, 11:50, 11:51. Bumpy notices everything. His eyes follow the nervous movements like a predator tracking wounded prey. "You new here, son?" Bumpy asks casually. The waiter's voice cracks. "Started last week, sir." Bumpy nods slowly, filing the information away. He reaches into his jacket pocket, removes a folded piece of paper, and places it on the table between them. His finger taps it once, twice, 3 times, a code Frank recognizes. Insurance. Final instructions. The last will and testament of a dying king. "Marcus," Bumpy says, and the name drops like a stone into still water. "My nephew." "Your friend. He sold me to the Genovese family for guaranteed territory and a direct heroin pipeline. Blood for business, family for money." The words hit Frank like physical blows. Marcus Sweet Johnson, Bumpy's sister's son, the kid who sat on Bumpy's lap at Sunday dinners, the teenager Frank taught to shoot pool and count money. The man who called Bumpy Uncle Bump until he was old enough to know better. Family. Brother. Judas. "That's impossible," Frank whispers, but even as he says it, the pieces align with brutal clarity. Marcus's sudden wealth, his new connections, his questions about Bumpy's health and meeting schedules. The betrayal has been hiding in plain sight. The nervous waiter returns with coffee, already creamed and sugared. His hand trembles as he sets the cup down, and he retreats too quickly, disappearing into the kitchen instead of waiting for their order. Bumpy lifts the cup, pauses, sniffs. Beneath the roasted beans, something else. Bitter almonds. Sharp. Chemical. Wrong. Recognition flashes in his eyes, but it's too late. The game is already over. Bumpy takes the first sip anyway. Maybe from habit. Maybe from resignation. Maybe because a king should die with dignity even when he knows the crown is poisoned. The reaction is immediate and violent. Not the slow drift of heart failure, but something chemical and brutal. Bumpy's body convulses. His hands claw at his throat. Foam appears at his lips. The restaurant erupts, screaming, overturning chairs, customers running for exits. But in the middle of chaos, Bumpy's focus narrows to one final act. His right hand locks onto Frank's wrist with dying strength. He pulls Frank close, pressing the folded letter into his palm with desperate fingers. His lips barely move, the words a ghost of sound that only Frank can hear. "Make him pay. 11:52 p.m. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson is pronounced dead, The official cause will read massive coronary thrombosis. Natural causes. Just another old gangster whose heart finally gave out under the weight of decades. Frank knows better. As paramedics swarm and police push crowds back, Frank notices everything the chaos obscures. The nervous waiter has vanished, gone before the ambulance arrived, disappeared into Harlem's maze of alleys and rooftops. Bumpy's coat lies on the floor, and when Frank checks the inside pocket, $50,000 in cash is missing. Tonight's collections, gone. The coffee cup sits abandoned on the table, and Frank leans close enough to smell the bitter almond scent of cyanide rising from the dark ring at the bottom. Murder disguised as mercy, assassination dressed as natural causes. Hours later, Frank sits alone in a safe house on 123rd Street. The city outside mourns a heart attack buying the lie wholesale. In the silence of the bare apartment, Frank finally unfolds the letter with trembling hands. Bumpy's handwriting is shaky but deliberate, each word carved with dying purpose. Marcus Sweet Johnson. 447 West 145th Street. Genovese protection. 3 blocks controlled. Heroin pipeline guaranteed. Payment received $50,000 plus territory. Sold his uncle for a seat at the Italian table. Family for money. Make him pay, not quick. Make him irrelevant first. The dead can't suffer. But the broken can. Frank reads it 3 times, hoping the letters will rearrange themselves into something bearable. They don't. The betrayal cuts deeper than business. This is Cain killing Abel. This is family destroying family for guaranteed profit. The mathematics of revenge don't add up to survival. Marcus has backing from the 5 families now. He controls 3 prime Harlem blocks with soldiers who are loyal because they're well paid. A direct attack means war with people who have been perfecting murder since before Frank was born. But waiting makes him look weak, and in Harlem, weakness is terminal. Frank walks to the fireplace and strikes a match. He holds the flame to the corner of Bumpy's letter, watching his mentor's final words curl into ash. But the name Marcus Johnson is burned into his brain like a brand, permanent and searing. He won't just kill the traitor. Death is mercy, and Marcus deserves no mercy. Frank will do something worse. He'll make Marcus watch his empire crumble. He'll turn him into a ghost haunting his own territory. He'll build something so massive, so pure, and so profitable that Marcus and his Italian masters will starve from the inside out. The dead can't suffer, Frank whispers to the ashes floating in the fireplace. But the broken can. Tomorrow, Frank Lucas stops being a driver. Tomorrow, he becomes a ghost with a single purpose: revenge disguised as revolution. The assassination is over. The war has just begun. Bangkok, September 1968. The air hits Frank Lucas like a physical wall of heat, exhaust, and possibility. He steps off a military transport, carrying $100,000 strapped to his body, a fake passport identifying him as a furniture importer, and Bumpy Johnson's final lesson carved into his soul: the system is designed for you to lose, so stop playing their game entirely. 12,000 miles from Harlem, surrounded by the chaos of a city where American soldiers stumble through streets thick with incense and desperation, Frank prepares to commit the ultimate act of economic heresy. For 50 years, the Italians have controlled heroin through a chain of middlemen that stretches from Turkish poppy fields to French laboratories to Corsican smugglers. By the time their product reaches Harlem corners, it has been cut 4 times and diluted to 10% purity. The mathematics are simple exploitation: buy low, cut often, sell high. Frank isn't here to negotiate better terms in their game. He's here to break the board entirely. The journey north takes 3 days of bribes, back road driving, and sleeping in trucks that smell like diesel and death. Past American military bases, humming with helicopters and fear. Past villages burned to ash by wars that have no names. Past checkpoints where men with AK-47s search for contraband while letting the real contraband pass with the right handshake and the right amount of cash. War makes everything possible, and Frank understands that chaos is just another form of opportunity. At the edge of the Golden Triangle, where Laotian, Burmese, and Thai borders dissolve into jungle and warlords control more territory than governments, Frank meets the source. Kun Sa waits in a compound that overlooks poppy fields stretching beyond the horizon, 60% of the world's heroin supply growing like a white sea under mountain sun. The Opium King is 40 years old, educated, ruthless, and bored with Corsican middlemen who negotiate like frightened merchants bringing tribute to a distant emperor. When Frank walks into the compound alone, unarmed, carrying cash instead of promises, Kun Sa sees something the Italians never recognized, hunger that matches his own. Frank's pitch is surgical in its simplicity. I buy direct, no middlemen, no cuts, 98% pure. I pay $42,000 per kilo in cash, American dollars, no credit, no delays. You get more money than the French ever offered. I get better product than anyone in America has ever seen. The people who have been robbing both of us get nothing. Kun Sa studies this American nobody who speaks with the confidence of kings. Around them, armed men shift in the heat, waiting for orders that could end in handshakes or gunfire. The Corsicans will kill you, the warlord says through his interpreter. The Italians will kill you. Your own people will kill you. Frank's response cuts through jungle air like a blade. They have to find me first. The deal is struck with a handshake that will generate $52 million annually and destroy every traditional heroin pipeline on the East Coast. Frank arranges the most audacious smuggling operation in criminal history. Military coffins returning from Vietnam with more than medals in their false bottoms. American boys dying in Southeast Asia become unwitting mules in their own caskets. The irony is brutal and perfect. The same war machine killing soldiers becomes Frank's private shipping company, and nobody inspects the dead. November 1968. Harlem. A new product floods the streets with a name that sounds like jazz and hits like revelation. Blue Magic. The mathematics are devastating in their elegance. Frank pays $42,000 per kilo for 98% pure heroin. He cuts it once to 50% purity, still twice as strong as anything on the street, and generates $300,000 in revenue per kilo. The profit margins aren't just obscene, they're revolutionary. Cost per kilo, $42,000. Revenue per kilo after $300,000. Profit margin text. $42,000, $300,000, $42,000, 6-word food percent. The effect on Harlem is instantaneous and catastrophic for the competition. Addicts who used to chase 3 or 4 bags of 30% pure product to get right now need 1 bag of Blue Magic. The dope fiend is the most honest customer in the world. He goes where the high is, and Blue Magic hits like a car crash wrapped in silk. Marcus Sweet Johnson feels the earthquake from his office above 145th Street. His numbers start hemorrhaging. His corners go quiet. His workers start murmuring about this new product that makes their Italian garbage look like baby powder. Marcus demands answers from his Genovese backers, but they have none to give. Their Corsican suppliers swear nothing has changed. Their chemists can't replicate the purity. Their street intelligence reports the same ghost story. Nobody knows who's running Blue Magic, where it comes from, or how to stop it. Frank remains invisible, operating through discipline and silence exactly as Bumpy taught him. No chinchilla coats, no diamond watches, no flashy cars parked where cops can admire them. He goes to work like a mid-level accountant, same schedule, same unremarkable suit, same ghost-like presence. He's generating millions monthly and looks like he processes insurance claims. The Genovese family calls emergency meetings, trying to understand how their monopoly evaporated in 6 weeks. They built a structure where every grain of heroin in black neighborhoods passes through their hands, where tribute flows upward like a river. Now a nobody driver, a man they used to ignore in Bumpy's shadow, is moving volume they can't track, distributing product they don't control, using supply lines they can't see. Invisible is untouchable. Marcus responds the only way desperation knows. Louder. New cars. New chains. New parties with champagne fountains while his territory shrinks block by block. He threatens blue magic dealers, but they return the next day, silent and relentless. He demands tribute from Frank's distributors, but they vanish like smoke and reappear on different corners. Every move makes him weaker. Every threat exposes his panic. February 1969. Marcus demands a sit-down at a social club on 145th Street. He thinks he's summoning an upstart who got lucky. Some country boy who stumbled into a good connection and needs education about hierarchy and respect. Frank agrees to the meeting with the calm of a man who's already won. They sit across a scarred wooden table in a back room that smells like cigars and desperation. Marcus wears a $10,000 silk suit and enough gold to stock a jewelry store. Frank wears a plain black turtleneck and no jewelry. The contrast is a sermon delivered without words. Marcus opens with threats disguised as brotherly concern. "You're moving too fast, Frank, taking too much, making people nervous. The Italians are asking questions I can't answer." His voice carries the false warmth of snakes and salesmen, the practiced charm of a man who sold his uncle for guaranteed territory. Frank says nothing. Silence is power. Bumpy's ghost whispers approval from shadows. Marcus's mask begins to crack. "You think you're untouchable? You think you can just walk into Harlem and take what's not yours? I run these streets now. I took the throne because I had the guts to do what was necessary." The mention of taking the throne changes the air pressure in the room. Frank's eyes lock onto Marcus's, and for a split second, the rage almost breaks through the discipline. But Bumpy's voice echoes stronger than emotion. The loud man dies. Frank leans forward, his voice dropping to a whisper more terrifying than screaming. "You think this is about money, Marcus? You think this is about percentages and corners and tribute?" He pauses, letting silence stretch until Marcus flinches. "I don't want your territory. I don't want your Italian friends. I don't want your crown." "Then what do you want?" Marcus demands, sweat beading despite the February cold seeping through windows. Frank stands slowly, his smile cold as winter morning. "I don't want your corner, Marcus. I want your soul. I want you to wake up every morning and watch your kingdom turn to dust. I want you to be the king of nothing." As Frank reaches the door, he delivers the final blow without looking back. "Uncle Bump said to tell you hello." The color drains from Marcus's face like water from a broken dam. The implication crashes over him with the force of revelation. Frank knows, has always known. The meeting wasn't negotiation, it was notification. The trial is over. The sentence has been passed. Execution is just a matter of timing. Frank walks out into February wind, wearing the smile of a man who understands that revenge isn't about killing your enemy. It's about making them watch everything they value turn to ash while they stand powerless to stop it. Marcus thinks he just survived a business meeting. He doesn't realize he just received his death sentence. The Blue Revolution isn't just business. It's economic warfare disguised as capitalism. And Marcus Sweet Johnson, the man who poisoned a king for Italian promises, is about to learn that some debts can only be paid in suffering. The dead can't feel pain, but the broken can feel everything, and Frank Lucas has just begun the systematic destruction of the man who murdered his father. There's a moment when hunger transforms into habit, when the discipline that built an empire becomes the throne that blinds a king. For 3 years, Frank Lucas lived by Bumpy's scripture with religious devotion: stay small, stay quiet, stay invisible. Same unremarkable suit every day. Same pew at the same church every Sunday. Same ghost-like presence, even while generating $52 million annually in untaxed revenue. That discipline printed money like a federal mint. But success is more addictive than any drug Frank ever sold. Then comes Nicky Barnes. Barnes is the walking contradiction of everything Bumpy preached. Where Frank moves like smoke, Barnes parades like a carnival. Where Frank whispers, Barnes screams from magazine covers. They call him Mr. Untouchable because he believes his own mythology. And Harlem loves the spectacle. Diamond rings on every finger, gold chains thick as anchor rope, cars that cost more than houses. Barnes becomes the visible face of black power in the heroin trade, while Frank remains the invisible engine generating the real profits. The problem isn't Barnes, the problem is what Barnes awakens in Frank: the hunger to be seen, to be recognized, to step out of shadows and claim credit for building the most sophisticated drug empire in American history. For 3 years, Frank has been the ghost while other men steal the spotlight, and the isolation starts eating at his discipline like acid on steel. March 8, 1971. Madison Square Garden pulses with 20,000 voices screaming for blood. Muhammad Ali versus Joe Frazier, the fight of the century, where legends come to be witnessed by other legends. The arena glitters with every species of American royalty, and Frank Lucas makes the fatal decision to join them not as a ghost, but as a king. The chinchilla coat costs $125,000. Full length, silver white, with a matching hat that sits on Frank's head like a crown he never should have worn. When he walks down the aisle with his wife, the arena doesn't just notice, it stops. Conversations pause mid-sentence. Cameras flash like machine gun fire. Frank Lucas, the man who built an empire in shadows, steps into blinding light wearing his success like armor. Bumpy's voice screams from the grave, the loudest man in the room is the weakest man in the room. For the first time in his life, Frank ignores it. Detective Richie Roberts sits in cheaper seats with a baseball cap pulled low, watching through binoculars. He's been chasing ghosts for 2 years, following Blue Magic's impossible purity, investigating a heroin operation that shouldn't exist according to every rule of organized crime. Until tonight, until a man wearing more money than most dealers earn in 5 years sits ringside like a billboard advertising his own arrest. Roberts lifts his camera and starts shooting, not the fight, but the coat. The man, the mistake that will crack his case wide open. But the real danger watches from the shadows. Marcus Sweet Johnson sits in his crumbling empire, watching Frank preen in chinchilla armor, and finally understands his opportunity. Frank's discipline is cracking. The armor has a weakness. The ghost wants to be seen, and visible men can be destroyed. Marcus moves with the desperation of a rat in a burning building. His territory has shrunk to 2 blocks of desperate addicts buying garbage heroin because they can't afford Blue Magic. His Italian backers are losing patience. He has 1 card left to play: information that kills kings. April 1971. Marcus sits in a sterile federal building facing DEA agents and a prosecutor. The air smells of stale coffee and betrayal. He's sweating despite the air conditioning, trading the only currency he has left, Frank's secrets. It's not the Italians supplying him, Marcus says, his voice shaking with the enormity of his betrayal. It's Lucas. Frank Lucas. And he's bringing it in direct from Southeast Asia, The agents lean forward. How? Marcus hesitates at the point of no return. Once he speaks, he's dead to the streets forever. But silence means death at Frank's hands. Coffins. Military coffins from Vietnam. False bottoms. The dead soldiers are the mules. The revelation hits like a nuclear bomb. The man who murdered Bumpy Johnson just signed the death warrant for Bumpy's chosen heir. Betrayal, consuming betrayal in an endless cycle of rats eating rats. The investigation moves with federal precision. Armed with Marcus's blueprint, the D maps the invisible empire brick by brick. Wiretaps. Surveillance. Financial records. The ghost becomes visible under the harsh light of systematic betrayal. January 28, 1975. Dawn breaks cold over Teaneck, New Jersey. The sledgehammer hits Frank's front door at 6:47 a.m. with the force of 3 years of investigation. DIA agents swarm like an occupying army, finding cash hidden in walls, heroin stashed in ceilings, ledgers documenting millions in transactions, everything Marcus promised and more. Frank is dragged out in handcuffs and pajamas, stripped of his chinchilla armor. As they load him into the federal vehicle, he sees a familiar figure across the street. Marcus watches from behind tinted glass, wearing a small, terrified, victorious smile. He thinks he's won by becoming a federal informant. Their eyes meet for 3 seconds that contain years of history, friendship, betrayal, murder, revenge, and the bitter mathematics of streets where everyone loses eventually. But Frank doesn't look defeated. His smile carries something Marcus doesn't understand, knowledge that prison isn't the end of the game, just a change of venue. Marcus thinks he sent Frank to hell. He doesn't realize he just sent the devil to university. Prison isn't a cage for a man like Frank. It's a fortress where he can operate without distractions, a recruitment center where information becomes the ultimate currency. The chinchilla coat was a mistake. The vanity was weakness. But the lesson has been learned. As New Jersey disappears through the window of the federal transport, Frank's mind calculates angles, leverage points, and the price Marcus will pay for thinking betrayal equals victory. The loud man dies. The silent man lives. But the invisible man? The invisible man becomes legend, even from behind bars. Frank Lucas is going to prison for 70 years, but his war with Marcus Sweet Johnson is just beginning. Some debts transcend prison walls, and Frank always pays his debts in full. The golden cage has closed, but the hunter is still hunting. Metropolitan Correctional Center, Manhattan. February 1975. The federal holding cell measures 8 feet by 10 feet, designed to break men through the mathematics of claustrophobia and time. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead like mechanical insects, never fully dark, never truly bright. Most men pace these concrete boxes like caged animals. Most men panic when they calculate 70 years against the beating of their hearts. Most men start talking to walls just to hear human voices, even their own. Frank Lucas sits perfectly still. 70 years. The prosecutor delivers this number like a death certificate, not a sentence. The mathematics are simple and brutal. Frank is 42 years old, which means he dies in this cage, forgotten and broken. The Italians whisper through prison corridors that Frank can't be allowed to testify, passing contracts like communion wafers, $50,000 for a shank in the ribs, $100,000 if it looks like suicide. Marcus Sweet Johnson celebrates somewhere in witness protection, thinking his federal immunity is armor against the ghost of Bumpy Johnson. They're all wrong, because none of them understand the final lesson Bumpy whispered in smoke-filled backrooms. True power isn't about what you know, It's about what others think you know. The federal prosecutor arrives with briefcases full of evidence and decades of prison time. He spreads photographs across the metal table like tarot cards predicting Frank's future. Surveillance photos, transaction records, wiretap transcripts. He wants the complete architecture of the Blue Magic Empire handed over in exchange for reduced sentences. Names, dates, connections, the systematic dismantling of everything Frank built in Bumpy's honor. Frank listens with the patience of a man who's already calculated every angle. When the prosecutor finishes his pitch, Frank responds with 3 words that change everything. I'll tell you everything. But Frank's cooperation isn't surrender, it's strategy disguised as capitulation. He refuses to betray his soldiers, the men who moved his product and kept his secrets with religious devotion. Instead, he offers something more valuable to their careers and more dangerous to the system. The corrupt, nipped Special Investigations Unit that enabled the entire heroin trade to flourish like cancer in sunlight. 75 cops on the take. Specific names, specific amounts, specific crimes documented with the precision of a forensic accountant, detective badges used as licenses to steal, evidence rooms treated like private inventory. Frank has kept records more detailed than the department's own internal affairs division because information is the only currency that spends in every economy, legal or criminal. The revelation detonates like a car bomb in City Hall. 3/4 of an elite narcotics unit exposed as criminals wearing badges. The scandal makes national headlines, destroys careers, and rains indictments like biblical plagues. In the chaos, Frank becomes the most protected witness in federal custody. Not just valuable, but untouchable. But the real masterstroke happens in shadows, during cooperation meetings where Frank feeds information like a master chef, seasoning a dish only he can taste. He mentions Marcus's name carefully, strategically, always in connection with federal agents and immunity deals. He drops subtle hints about Marcus meeting with prosecutors before Frank's arrest. He suggests Marcus has been cooperating for years, not months, painting a picture more damaging than any direct accusation. Federal agents don't realize they're being played. Every question they ask about Marcus, every confirmation they seek, every follow-up meeting creates a paper trail suggesting Marcus is their primary cooperating witness. The bureaucracy of investigation becomes Frank's weapon, and the weapon is aimed directly at Italian paranoia. Word travels through prison walls like electricity through copper wire. Defense lawyers talk to prosecutors. Prosecutors talk to agents. Information leaks like water through cracked concrete. The whisper campaign Frank constructed travels from courthouse to street corner, and finally to social clubs in Little Italy where the Genovese family hears the rumor that will kill Marcus. He wasn't forced to become a rat. He's been a federal asset inside their operation since 1968. Paranoia is the most efficient assassin in organized crime. The Italians look at Marcus living comfortably on their payroll, protected by federal immunity, and they don't see an asset anymore. They see a ticking bomb that knows where bodies are buried. A man who has witnessed their meetings, heard their names, and learned their secrets. If he's already cooperating with federal agents, he's not protection, he's a liability that will explode in their faces. September 1977. Marcus Sweet Johnson is found in the trunk of a stolen Cadillac in a Queens industrial lot, executed by the very people who promised him protection and territory. 3 bullets in the back of the head, the same signature that ended 1,000 other rats who thought immunity meant immortality. The man who poisoned Bumpy Johnson dies the same way Bumpy did, betrayed by the system he trusted, murdered by people who used him until he became inconvenient. Frank watches the news from his prison cell, the television flickering with images of Marcus's covered body being loaded into a coroner's van. For the first time in 2 years, Frank smiles. Not from joy, there's no pleasure in this mathematics of revenge, but from completion. He lost his freedom, his empire, his fortune. But he kept his oath to the dying king who gave him everything. "Make him pay," Bumpy whispered with his last breath, and Frank paid that debt in full. Frank serves 12 years instead of 70, walking out of federal prison in 1987 with nothing except the knowledge that he honored the only thing that mattered: loyalty to the man who saw potential in a nobody from North Carolina and transformed him into a legend. Decades pass like seasons. Frank Lucas becomes a cautionary tale, a Hollywood movie, a ghost story told in Harlem barbershops. But every month, without fail, fresh flowers appear on Bumpy Johnson's grave in Woodlawn Cemetery. No card, no name, just white roses that smell like respect and remembrance, a tribute that continues until Frank's own death in 2019. Frank Lucas sits in a wheelchair in a Newark nursing home. His body broken by time and choices, but his mind still sharp as the straight razor Bumpy taught him to carry. A documentary filmmaker asks the question everyone wants answered: was it worth it? The empire, the money, the 70 years you faced, was any of it worth it? Frank is silent for a long time, his eyes focused on something beyond the camera, beyond the room, beyond the years. When he finally speaks, his voice carries the weight of a lifetime spent learning that every choice has a price. "The throne is temporary," he says quietly, echoing words spoken by a dying king in a corner booth 51 years earlier. "But honor is eternal. I didn't build an empire for money. I built it to keep a promise to the only man who ever believed I was more than a driver." He pauses, his gnarled hands trembling in his lap. Marcus thought betrayal would save him. The Italians thought murder would protect them. The feds thought prison would break me. They were all playing for money and power. I was playing for something they couldn't understand: loyalty to a man who died believing I would avenge him. The filmmaker presses, "But you lost everything. Your freedom, your family, your fortune. What did you really win?" Frank's smile is small but absolute. "I kept my word. In a world where everyone betrays everyone, I stayed loyal to the man who made me. That's not losing. That's the only way to win." 3 months later, Frank Lucas dies in his sleep. The obituaries call him a criminal, a kingpin, a cautionary tale about the cost of ambition. But at Bumpy Johnson's grave, white roses appear one final time, and this time there's a card that reads simply, "The student kept his promise." Rest easy, King. The loudest man in the room is the weakest man in the room. The silent man lives. But the loyal man becomes eternal, measured not by the empire he built or the money he generated, but by the promise he kept to a dying king who believed honor was worth more than kingdoms. In a world built on betrayal, where loyalty is currency nobody trades, Frank Lucas answered the ultimate question with his life: some debts can only be paid in loyalty, and some promises are worth more than freedom itself. The throne was temporary, the empire crumbled, the money vanished. But the promise, the sacred oath whispered over a dying king, remained unbroken until the final breath. That's the legend of Frank Lucas. Not the story of a criminal, but the mythology of a man who understood that honor is the only thing you take to the grave, and loyalty is the only currency that spends in eternity.